All right, everyone. Um, Thank you for joining today. Today's webinar is sponsored by Ardent Partners and CoreCentric. Today we are going to be discussing achieving AP success, the metrics that matter in 2020. Next slide, please. So before we begin, there's a few things that we need to go over. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, we encourage you to use the question and answer panel located in the webinar screen, and we will answer your questions at the end of today's webinar. If for some reason we don't have enough time to get to your question, we will reach out to you personally via email after the webinar concludes. Additionally, we will also be sending everyone who is registered for this presentation today an electronic copy of the webinar at the conclusion of today's webinar. Next slide, please. Our presenters today are Bob Cohen, Research Director for Ardent Partners, and Dan Andrews, Senior Vice President of CoreCentric. And at this time, I am going to turn things over to Dan.
Thanks, Doug. Welcome, everyone. Delighted that you're with us here today. Bob and I can walk through some great information. Just want to give you a couple of comments about CoreCentric. We're a global company that focuses really in the whole source-to-pay, order-to-cash, and fleet solutions with thousands of clients, processing about $225 billion in transaction value. I think one of the comments I'd like to share with the group as you're thinking about CoreCentric is our extraordinarily high customer retention rate, particularly in a SaaS business model. Retaining a customer level and satisfaction of 95% is extraordinary. It's because we value each customer one at a time. And we look forward to sharing with you some information today I think you'll find exciting in your careers. I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who's going to tell us a little bit more about Ardent Partners. Bob?
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Doug. Welcome, everybody. I'm pleased to be here along with Doug and Dan and the CoreCentric team to talk today a little about achieving success in AP. Before we begin that, I wanted to talk to you and introduce you to Ardent Partners for those of you that may not be familiar with us. Ardent's a research and advisory firm that focuses on defining and advancing financial operations and supply management strategies, processes, and technologies that drive business value and accelerate organizational transformation within the enterprise. Ardent actively covers the financial operations and supply management marketplace and produces research to help decision makers really do two things. One is understand industry best practices and how to improve performance. And two, get some insight into the technology landscape and how to identify the best fit solutions for the specific budget and requirements. Last year, we ran a report, or we produced a report called ePayables Technology Advisor, and one of the participants was CoreCentric, and they were a leader in that space. Not surprising, given what Doug just talked about, what Dan just talked about, with that high retention rate. There's a definite correlation between scoring as a leader on our chart and the retention rate of CoreCentric. So there's many other things that go into that. For those of you that aren't familiar with that report, I recommend contacting either myself or Dan or Doug to get a copy of that to see why CoreCentric rated where it did within the report. So let's move on. Payables Place is one of the only sites that exists specifically for AP and finance professionals. If you like today's webinar, we encourage you to visit the Payables Place site for more insights, best practices on AP, B2B payments, and technology news, thought leadership discussions. The site frequently contains content from subject matter experts. Last year, we did an interview with the CEO from CoreCentric. That's up there. It's very insightful. We have subject matter expertise pieces from myself and other analysts within the Ardent team. And it's a great place just to find information about what's going on in the industry and topics such as spend management, accounts payable automation, B2B payments. So if you like what you see today, please go forward and check that out. So the data we're going to show today comes from a report that we produced last year. The 14th annual AP themed report is part of an ongoing dialogue that Ardent has with AP and finance leaders for over a decade. We follow a rigorous process that's been developed over 15 years researching financial operations market. The research in this report represents web-based survey responses of 167 AP, finance, and treasury leaders, all of whom took the survey. And these 167 participants shared their strategies, intentions, as well as the operational and performance results that helped us define the best-in-class data that we're going to share with you shortly. performance and understand some of the levers that these leading groups pull in order to obtain the advantage and become best in class. So moving now to the agenda, just so you know what's going on, and then take a look at why metrics matter, some of the key trends from the survey data that we have there. Then look at, what's holding AP back. It's obviously on the precipice of moving forward, but there's some constraints. So let's take a look at those, because if you know what they are, then it's easier to overcome them and to plan for those. We'll take a look what the future holds. We asked the respondents, what does the future look like? What kind of skills and technology do you need? So we'll share that with you. Also, very helpful as you're planning out not only today, but how are you to be successful going into the future. Then we'll take a look at the impact that automation has upon performance. And I think you'll see some stark contrast between those that have automated and those that haven't, and you can see some tangible results. So if you're looking to build a business case as to why we should automate or automate further, I think this will give you some great data with which to proceed. And then finally, we'll close with how do you achieve success in AP, give you some tips and advice there, and then we'll get to your questions and answers. As Doug mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box now, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So let's take a look now at why metrics matter. The gentleman on your screen, excuse me, is Peter Drucker. Peter was an American management consultant, educator, and author whose writings contributed to the philosophical and practical foundation of the modern business corporation. He's one of the most widely known and influential thinkers on management. And even though Peter passed a number of years ago, his work is still used by managers worldwide. And what he said, and what one of his basic tenets was, as you see on the screen there, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, which is why KPIs and metrics are so important to achieving success within AP. And what we're going to show you today are some key metrics that you should be tracking in order to facilitate your success going forward. Make sense? Okay. Let's take a look now at some of the key trends that we see in the marketplace here. Over the last 3 years, finance executives state there's been an increased focus on the role of the modern day AP function. This has resulted in more broad-based understanding of the function and its ability to impact value, savings, and intelligence. This is a departure from the past where AP groups were relegated to the unglamorous back office, managing the long-term cycle of tactical manual processes and an abundance of paper, destined to remain a function that would never see the light of day. AP is also benefiting from a larger business trend where more business and finance executives are finally realizing they can drive more strategic value from their AP unit. This realization translates into greater awareness and respect for the function. In fact, as you see on the screen here, Ardent Partners research shows that a majority, 55% of the businesses perceive AP as very or exceptionally valuable to the overall enterprise. This is clearly a positive sign that AP is being viewed differently than it has in the past. And with last year's number being over 50% as well, this represents 2 years in a row where, for the first time, AP's perceived value has been above that 50% level. So we're moving in the right direction. Doug, why do you think the perceived value is increasing?
Well, I tell you what, Bob, I'm really glad. I'm really glad to see that it is trending in the right direction as you described. I'm encouraged by that because it's telling me that the organizations are recognizing the value that AP is bringing to the organizations. And I think if you're an AP professional, you're in a really great spot right now because AP professionals are partnering with a lot of the procurement departments, and they're not just paying bills. They're doing so much more. They're providing a lot of the analysis. They can help provide reporting to help source your vendors a little better, improve the working capital as you're looking at your overall capital management opportunities, working with cash discounts, improving the process, adding value to the organizations, and all those KPIs that you described. So I think at the end of the day, with the perceived value trending in the right direction, it's continuing to demonstrate that the AP professionals are such a valuable resource in the organization. And if half of the time they're spending is dealing with paper invoices, then you can't really make that contribution that you could if it was electronic. So I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing the perceived value increase.
And I would completely agree with you. I think AP is also getting a little bit smarter and learning that it doesn't sit in isolation and that it's actually a shared service that's used by many other parts of the business. And so when AP talks to procurement or treasury or the line of business leaders, they ask them a little bit more insightful questions as to, what can AP provide to you? And a funny thing happens, Dan, as I'm sure you can attest, is when you go out from AP and talk to other business units, you find out what they want, and when you deliver what they want, they're much happier, and their perceived value increases along the way. So everything you said is true, and it's also AP becoming a little bit smarter and realizing that they don't exist in a bubble. They're not a back office function. They should be front and center into the organization. So Dan just mentioned dealing with paper and how if you're stuck in a morass of and buried in paper, how it's really difficult to provide, strategic value. Well, the sad reality is too much paper still exists in the AP process, and this is a problem that's holding AP back from realizing its true potential. So if you are still drowning in paper out there, the good news is you don't have to be. There's great solutions out there that can help you eliminate the paper entirely and get to a much more automated, strategic value-adding proposition and increase that value that we just talked about previously. So you might wonder, the last slide showed that about 50% of invoices were still being received in paper, but what this slide and statistics shows is that about a quarter of the suppliers are submitting invoices electronically, and 75% are still submitting in paper format. And what does that mean? What do we decipher this data to mean? What that means is larger suppliers who tend to send more invoices have realized the benefits of sending invoices electronically, while the long tail and the smaller suppliers that most of the organizations deal with are still sending invoices in a paper format. So, glass half full, glass half empty here. The good news is larger suppliers have realized the benefits of sending invoices electronically. The downside is smaller suppliers still aren't, but there's plenty of technology available out there to enable suppliers to send invoices electronically, and it's a win-win for both the suppliers and the buyers. This is the business case that's often used to get a project approved, but alone, it may not get the budget, as many other projects also put forward by other departments also show significant savings. A better way to communicate the value of AP automation is not just the cost savings, but the value added. Dan, we're showing here $10 as the average cost to process an invoice. Do you have customers that are able to achieve better than this? And if so, how?
We do, absolutely. And when you think about that $10 per invoice, I've seen clients that are a fraction of that, 80% of that less, a couple of dollars, because there are so many weapons that are available today to be able to provide those capabilities. I'll just give you a couple of examples, Bob, as we're thinking about this. The first one is, let's say you have an invoice that was originated from a purchase order. If you can take that data from your systems that the procurement team spent time making sure it's correct and getting it entered into the ERP, if you can take that data and you can process it and electronically match it with a receipt and an invoice and eliminate a lot of the errors, that whole process is streamlined and it's electronic, and your cost will be dramatically less than $10. So let's say you have an invoice that maybe there isn't a PO and you want to put some other rules in place. Well, you can use straight through process, which I think we're going to talk about a little later today, but you could put some rules in place that allow you those same capabilities. So maybe you have an invoice that isn't originated from a PO, but with those business rules in place where they can capture a lot of the information that can get processed in your environment, that also can streamline through a process that is fractionally the cost of the $10. And so think of it like this. Think of it as maybe your competitor can process an invoice for a couple of dollars and you're spending on average $10. So think about the next time your CFO is at a conference and talking to the colleagues and they're saying, yeah, we process at 80% better than our competitors or vice versa. I think that whole concept of streamlining the invoice and reducing the cost for a single invoice is going to add so much more value because it can be achieved. I've seen it. We have clients that have done that, and it's just a much better, profitable type of environment.
Without a doubt. You don't want to be that AP department with the CFO who comes back saying,
Yeah.
I was just at a conference and I was talking to one of my peers and he said his company can process an invoice for $2 and we're not even measuring ours, or our cost is $10 or $15. Why is that? You want to get ahead of that question. You want to be, Dan, right? You want to be that CFO coming back going, hey, great job, guys. I just talked to our rival CFO and it cost them 5 times more to process an invoice. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Congratulations.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's take a look at electronic payments. So digital payments make complete sense. They're faster, more secure, accurate, and more streamlined than paper. Paper checks are a way of the past. However, they're still very prevalent in our society. While less than 20% of businesses today conduct digital payments, the stage is set for digitization of payment execution and settlement to become an accepted piece of the AP function. Considering where AP leaders sit in the destined journey in regards to driving true business value, digital payments are going to become a means of reducing the amount of paper inherent in the AP department and freeing up time for staffers to spend more time on strategic business activities. Similar to the paper invoices, paper payments are something that if you are not paying electronically, it's something that you should definitely look into, because while in this presentation we're not going to show the cost to process and a paper versus electronic payment, the difference is stark, similar to what you saw on the previous slide with the $10 being an average cost and best in class being $2, even less than that. So it's something you definitely want to take a look at. This is not a number that Ardent specifically tracks, but I recently read that more than 16 billion checks, that's B, or billion with a B, were written in 2019. The potential for improvement is huge. So if you're doing things in a paper format, take a look at the process. Similar to AP, the entire process. AP doesn't stop when that invoice is approved and ready for payment. It also includes the payment of that invoice. If everything's automated up until that point and you're doing things in a manual fashion after that, where you need check stock, where you need to get a signature on a check, where you need to get 2 signatures on a check that's of other certain value, you need to mail it out, there's printing costs, there's postage costs, there's time costs, there's all sorts of costs that can be mitigated by going to digital payments. If you're not looking at it, it's something that should definitely be on your horizon. Let's take a look at early payment discounts. The percentage of early payment discounts can be a bellwether to how well your AP department is functioning overall. Almost every invoice comes with the opportunity to take an early payment discount, but the question is, are you in a position to take it? When you're in a position to take it, then you have the opportunity to say, does it make financial sense to do so? Today, roughly only 1/4 of early payment discounts offered are actually taken. So there's a huge opportunity for improvement here. This KPI, the time to process a single invoice, along with the cost to process an invoice, are typically the 2 most tracked statistics by AP departments. The average time to process an invoice is now at just over 8 days. 10 years ago, it was over 20 days. Why is it so important to track this metric? Because if your operation is performing well, the faster you can process the invoice, the more opportunities for improving your working capital management opens up, and it also lowers the cost to process that invoice overall. So, can you process an invoice quicker? And will that help you develop a more proactive payment strategy, one that might include supply chain finance, improve working capital management, and provide you with new options that didn't exist because you were always at the payment date when that invoice was due or late? So the time to process an invoice is one of the most tracked KPIs that we see out there. This is a key indicator to how well an AP department is performing. It's also commonly referred to as touchless processing, straight through processing, FTP, a number of different names that are here. Improving this KPI is something that all AP departments should be focusing on and planning for. Why? Pretty simple. It translates to lower cost, faster processing, and less transactional tactical work for AP. Dan, You mentioned straight-through processing before. Talk to me a little bit about it and why it's so important.
Yeah, it really is important, and I have a lot to say about this. So I'm going to give you a few examples for you guys to think about as you look at this. So when I think about straight-through processing, I think if your AP department can let those invoices flow through accurately, systematically, touchless, as Bob says, then it's only going to provide more value for the AP department to spend time on those other areas that we talked about as the perceived value of AP professionals continues to increase throughout the landscape. So let me give you a couple of examples on straight-through processing. And what I'd encourage you to think about is, why can't all the invoices follow the two paths that I'm going to describe for you? So let's start with the first example. Let's say you have some product, perhaps you're purchasing and you're sending out a purchase order and you send it electronically. And let's say that information can be delivered electronically to the supplier, whether it's in a traditional electronic format or maybe through a portal. However that information is delivered, it gets the information to the supplier electronically. And then the supplier, what they can do, when they say they ship the product, that receipt can be matched and that invoice can be processed either electronically or through a portal. It can be flipped electronically into an environment where it gets matched electronically and integrated into the ERP system. Once it hits your ERP system, it's already been matched, it's already been validated, the product's already been received. That information gets transmitted over into your payment system so that you can electronically, as Bob was talking about on the previous slide, make sure that you make a payment electronically, virtual card, ACH, whatever, it's electronic. In that example of touchless processing or straight-through processing, after that initial entry of the order from your procurement department, other than the supplier providing some information on their side, it's touchless. It made it through your organization. First of all, it was electronically correct, it was technically correct, it was content correct, and it went through touchless in the environment so that you can report on it and use that data. That's the ideal environment. And we're only seeing 24% of that. So in that model, you can absolutely achieve that. We have clients that do that all the time, and they're spending their time not keying, not looking at paper, they're analyzing, and they're making better contributions to the organization. So you might be saying, okay, well, that's great, Dan, on one example where we're originating that invoice from the PO from our procurement department. What about some invoices that don't have that? Let me give you another example. Let's say, and I'll just throw this one out as an example, let's say you have some utility bills, and maybe you have a couple hundred locations. And think about it as a consumer too. When you get that utility bill, and let's say it's always within a predictable range. Let's say in this particular case, your utility bill is somewhere between $125 and $140, just as an example. If you know that, when you get that bill and you've already consumed that service, are you adding any value by looking at it if it falls within that range? Are you really adding any time or energy into that's creating something substantial for your organization to approve that? I say no, that's a waste of time. So if you can build business rules, and in this example where we're just taking one particular case of a utility bill, you can build those business rules that say, okay, from the time that that invoice maybe hits the US Post and it gets indexed and it gets captured and it gets electronically routed and it falls within this tolerance for this location, for this amount, I can electronically send it, goes into the ERP system, just like our previous example. It issues payment and we electronically pay. Those are two perfect examples of touchless or straight-through processing. In both of those cases, we didn't waste any time. We didn't add any labor or effort to be able to achieve this STP number. What we did is we used tools, we used technology, we used solutions so that the time that I would normally spend on that, I can spend it to all those other areas that continue to increase the value of the AP professional and the perceived value. So those are just two examples where I'd encourage you to ask yourself this. As you think about both those examples, think about your department and say, why is it that I don't have straight-through processing for everything? Why is it that every invoice you process, whether it came from an origination of a PO or if it came from US Post, I'm using the dichotomous opposite ends here of an invoice, Why is it that I can't have straight through processing for both of those? Because you know what? The good news is you can. You can have straight through processing on both of those examples. And I would encourage you to say, why am I not doing the organization? What am I missing to hit STP for everything? And don't let the exceptions manage the process. You should let the process manage the exceptions. So I kind of warned you, Bob. I had a lot to say about STP on that because I've seen organizations who have achieved it, and it's just a dramatic difference in their environment.
Great points. I actually want to continue the conversation slightly. And Dan, what you talked about was from the AP perspective of getting that invoice in and processed straight through. Talk to me a little bit. I know you talked to line of business owners as well. The people that are receiving that invoice, whether it's for security, maintenance, PR, whatever that recurring invoice is that comes in all the time, you know, how does that business manager feel about having to approve that same invoice for the same amount every single month? Does he think, or does she think that's a good use of their time, or do they think, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this?
Yeah, it's definitely the latter. And what I've seen is I've seen organizations who were mired in that type of an environment, and then when they migrated to STP, it's like a transformation. They're happier, they're adding more value. They know they're contributing. I mean, who wants to go into work every day and do something that says, you know what, I just kind of had to do this Monday task. I mean, every employee wants to contribute at the highest level. I mean, they want to feel good about how they're contributing to the organization and what they're doing to benefit their company. So when I see companies who have achieved a high straight through process, and I see them like the before and after, it's you know, so much better. It's better for the AP professional as well as the company, as well as how they feel about it. They're actually excited to come to work because they know they're contributing value each day and they're making a difference. They spend time on finding some things. They'll come in and say, hey, you know what? I had some time to do some analysis here, and I've determined that, you know, we have multiple suppliers selling some of the same things, and I equipped my procurement department with some of this information, and we made some better decisions. That's way more value than, you know what, I had to come in and key this stack of paper. So it truly is a win-win for the organization, the AP professionals, and ultimately the supplier who's benefiting from an improved environment.
Absolutely. It's a win-win situation. AP now gets to do more strategic functions rather than pushing paper around and chasing it around. And the business unit and the supplier, guess what? They don't have to approve invoices. And so they have time freed up because that invoice matches the business rules you talked about, or matches the PO, so it goes straight through for processing. You know, so the benefits are huge here. So let's move on. I think you and I could talk about this probably alone for an hour, but we have a number of other slides that we need to get to. So let's move on. Invoice acceptance rate. It's another key metric that must be used. Almost a quarter of all invoices processed last year experienced an exception. This means that they require double or triple the work to get them approved. It means more tactical and less strategic work for the AP staff. Just what Dan and I were talking about before. You need to track your invoice exception rate. How many invoices go straight through? How many are missing information? What are the root cause of the missing information? You need to analyze this because the lower the exception rate, the more productive and more valuable the AP department can be to the organization. So another key metric that you need to be tracking, and something we'll touch on a little bit later here as well. Invoices linked to a PO are automatically matched and approved at a much higher rate than non-PO invoices. This can be one lever for achieving a higher rate of straight-through processing that we were just talking about. Some industries are more apt to have POs than others. And as Dan mentioned there, those of you that may have less POs, use business rules that are available and automation tools to create like a PO-like match that occurs. You set the business rule, and Dan mentioned there can be tolerances in there. Set those up, because the more invoices that process straight through, the more time AP has for doing strategic value-adding activities that are more fun, I think Dan said, and less tactical paper pushing manual processes. Okay, so what's holding AP back? At the surface, AP is destined for great things, supported by the growing perception of the function as adding value to the enterprise at large. However, there's several sizable barriers that exist between AP and the vaunted higher ground. Exceptions. 62% of respondents reported that exceptions remain the bane of AP's existence. Invoice exceptions slow the processing to a crawl, creating detrimental bottlenecks that mute efficiency and effectiveness. That this press remains at the top of the major challenges category for several years running is telling. Even as AP treads into new and more strategic territory within the greater enterprise, everyday issues can still hamper the journey and stall its path forward before it even begins. Two other longstanding pressures prove that although AP has good momentum, it's not yet moved beyond many of the operational deficiencies that it's historically faced. Lengthy invoice approval times and too much paper also mean that no matter how far AP advances within the enterprise, including its overall perception, it must overcome some of the traditional challenges that it faces daily in order to free itself from the trappings of the back office. So, Dan, what do you see of some of the major challenges that your prospects face?
You know, I think I would narrow it down to like 3 or 4 different areas that when I think about the challenges of holding AP back, what are those barriers and what are those challenges? Well, the first one I would say is probably education. I think not everyone knows all the market solutions that are available. So in the examples we talked about earlier, Bob, with SDP, and you're right, we could probably talk about that for another hour. When you think about those 2 examples and you're listening to this webinar and you're thinking, okay, am I really processing my invoices electronically and STP all the way through from a PO? And for those that are non-PO driven, do I have the same straight through processing percentages? And if not, why not? So the first thing is, do you know that the technical solutions are available? There are ways for you to achieve STP for PO and non-PO to be able to create an environment in AP where the exceptions are not managing the process. So that's the first thing. Is it possible? Are the tools out there? Do I know about them? Are they available? Have I been exposed to them? Because that's the first thing. You have to know what those options are to help your environment. Second thing is, there's definitely way too much paper. And I think that's really a symptom of the first one, which is not necessarily knowing or taking advantage of the solutions and the technology that are available in the marketplace. Because while the percentage of the invoices that's paper is very high, the solutions to provide a streamlined environment are also exceedingly accepted, and many organizations have been able to achieve that high STP percentage. I think the third thing, when I think about the challenge, is why are we still talking about this percentage of AP that are still dealing with too much paper? You can see 40% on your slide here, paper volume, too much. I think some of it is change management because it's different and it requires a paradigm shift. And you have to seek some solutions that are out in the marketplace. You have to be able to find what those areas of expertise are. And finally, you know, how much time are we spending as an AP professional on looking up inquiries or suppliers that might have a question about something? And the time that you're spending on that, if you haven't equipped your supplier, you're not really helping them. So a lot of times we focus here about the buyers and we're thinking about their environment. Well, just for a minute, think about the supplier. What about them? All they're trying to do is get paid for their service or their product. You bought something from them. You bought a service or you bought a product. All they want to do is get paid. They don't want to make it difficult. They want to be easy to do business with, just like you. And so if you can figure out ways to provide solutions for you and the supplier, now what you're going to get is you're going to get a more cooperative environment for yourself, for your supplier. You're going to spend less time on dealing with all these exceptions. You're going to give them tools and yourself equipped so that you can provide a more streamlined environment. And it's going to help. It's not only going to help your team, it's going to help your suppliers. It's going to improve the quality of what you do every day as an AP professional. And so I think when you think of those challenges, you really have to go back and say, do I know about the solutions that are available in the marketplace? Can I make sure these solutions digitize and electronify my environment to get rid of the paper? And am I willing to embrace change? Am I willing to look at these different solutions to shift my paradigm so that I know that once I do this, it's going to be a different environment. And I will have to spend more time on analyzing and doing other things that maybe I'm not comfortable with today, or maybe I'd really like to do today, but I don't have the time. So when you factor all those together, it's going to help your environment. It's also going to allow you to overcome those challenges that are so, prevalent in our environment today.
No, excellent point. Some of the, you said a couple things. What you don't know, you don't know. If you don't know the solution is out there, hopefully anybody listening in today knows solutions are available, and that's why they're listening in, because they want to find out more about what they should be measuring and what's possible, and that's what we're hopefully providing them today. But we run across many people who run AP departments and are so stuck and so buried in just paper and manual processes. They don't have their time to stick their head above the paper and say, what should I be measuring? How am I doing? But that's really where you need to get to, is you need to take a step back and go, okay, there's got to be a better way. Let's start measuring how long it takes to process an invoice, how many exceptions we're facing, what's the root cause of those exceptions. And as the slide that we have in front of us here, which you mentioned during your speech there, supplier inquiries. When it comes to suppliers calling in, no news is good news. As Dan said, suppliers only contact AP department if there's a problem. Why do we get paid? Why do we get paid late? Why do we get paid short? Those are the reasons, as all of us on the phone know, why a supplier would contact an AP department, for the most part. Sure, hey, we have a new tax ID number. That's an occasional call. That's great. However, if you have a portal, you can self-service on that. One of the big challenges, in addition to the ones on the previous slide, and Dan was quite right in mentioning this, is almost a quarter of the AP department's report that almost a quarter of their time is spent handling inquiries from suppliers. It's something that, as Dan said, suppliers don't want to make that call, and AP probably doesn't want to pick up that phone call either. They have to track down the status of an invoice or the status of a payment. So it's something that you need to measure, and you need to track as why those suppliers are coming in. Is it a problem up the line with procurement and you're not getting the right information that's being put on the invoice or the purchase order, whatever it is? But you need to do some root cause analysis here, because imagine if you can take a quarter of the time that AP is spending on a tactical, kind of tail chasing exercise and gain that time back, think about the benefits that you can achieve and the value you can add. So let's take a look at the future of AP here. So AP is becoming more strategic and visionary, and it's thinking more about how they can add value to the greater organization. The respondents said, 80% said, in 2 years, AP is going to be a more collaborative type of unit. We're going to have an improved enterprise experience. We're looking to get full automation. We want to be an invoice-ready culture. This was phenomenal, because none of the top answers here are tactical ones. They're more strategic looking answers. And so they realize that the future lies in technology, lies in advancement, lies in working and providing value to the greater organization. Dan, you talked to lots of prospects. As your slide showed, you have thousands of customers there. I mean, do you see collaboration on the rise within your customers and the prospects, and how is this happening?
I do, and I see it really with the best companies. Because what happens is, if you're in the trenches of AP and you get, let's just say you get an invoice and it doesn't match the price, and then you go back to your counterpart in purchasing and you have a disagreement on it, and you're trying to figure out, is this the right amount, and what should be paid and what shouldn't be paid, all that noise ultimately bubbles up. And what I'm seeing is that the chief procurement officers and the CFOs, they're having more of a strategic mind meld. And the best companies are looking at this and they're saying, hey, how can we create a joint environment? Instead of trying to do this alone, why don't we have our teams work together from the sourcing through purchasing, through invoicing, all the way through payment? Why don't we put this overall process together that helps everybody? And so what's happening is the organizations, the leaders are getting together, they're providing more functional collaboration, and then they're putting together an environment that says, let's create a better view. Let's create a broader landscape. Let's provide more important information to the teams, and let's create an environment that's really like 1 + 1 is 3. Because when we work together, we have a better opportunity to provide full automation. And when you do that, you're going to align the different groups. And when you align the groups and say, okay, it's not AP's fault because they got this invoice in that was wrong, or it's procurement's fault because they had the wrong price on it. You know what? Step back a little bit, provide more of a collaborative environment, and say, how can we improve the overall enterprise by looking at the whole source to pay continuum, not just one area. And so these leaders are getting together, they're putting together some collaboration, and they're creating some systems that provide analytics. So what happens is they start publishing this data, and they start looking at it. They say, oh, I see why we're having problems over here. Maybe it's because of the pricing information in our systems. Or maybe the reason that we have a lower percentage of STP is because we haven't really created an environment that we're ordering properly, or we don't really have a lot of invoices that are generated from a PO. We just buy things, and we're not necessarily having a systematic process in place that helps the overall departments. So what I'm seeing is that in those organizations, those best companies, and I'm not surprised to see that 80% of this is really the highest measure here to talk about what AP is going to look like in 2 years, because the smart companies have figured that out. And they said, let's align the CPO and the CFO. Let's figure out how we can put all this together. And then once you do that, you're going to see more automation and ultimately an environment that says, I'm ready to embrace change. I'm ready to see where this helps me overall. And that's where you get the largest contribution, I think, overall. If you try to do it in silos, there's some efficiency gains, but it's much better if you can look at it at a broader level from a full collaboration perspective. That's where I'm seeing organizations that are really making the biggest difference. And I think it'll continue, like it says here on your slide, in the next couple of years.
Yep. And I think one thing when Dan and I were talking about this presentation before today, the one area of collaboration that we may have glossed over a little bit is collaboration with suppliers. Extremely important. Dan can talk on another day, and so can I, about collaboration with suppliers and the importance of that. But in AP, you're dealing with suppliers almost as much as you're dealing with internal employees. So talk to your suppliers. What's important to them? What are their challenges? What are their frustrations? Do they want to get paid early? Do they want to get paid late? Talk to them. Do they want a supplier portal? Do they not? Ask them how they want to work. So collaboration is important internally, but it's also with suppliers as well. So we continue the conversation here about the future of AP. And so what was needed what does AP need to read the next level? And, reassuringly, 76% said that smarter systems were critical in achieving success in the future. Additionally, with smarter systems, you get better analytics that can provide you with better business intelligence that you can share with the rest of the organization. You can make better, more informed decisions, lower costs, improve profitability, because now you're looking at all the data that AP is sitting on. And so that is critical, and it's refreshing and reassuring to see that AP is thinking this way. Like, hey, we have all this data. Why don't we mine this data? So we have smarter systems to do things better, faster, and cheaper, and then we have more insights into what's going on, some of the key things that are needed to achieve the next level. We also asked what skills are needed, and AP, once again, is thinking more strategically. Customer service, analytics and business intelligence, skills for reducing fraud and improving compliance, knowledge of not only AP, but the entire P2P process. So once again, very reassuring that AP is thinking about, we don't need to figure out how just to reduce paper. They're looking at customer service. What does customer service mean? Providing better service to suppliers and to internal people that leverage the AP system. So it's reassuring once again that people are thinking in AP are thinking much more strategically than tactically when the skills are needed in the future. Okay, let's take a look at the impact on automation on performance. So, Dan and I can talk all we want about why it's great to automate, what the benefits are, but here are some hard and cold facts that we share from our survey respondents. Now, Ardent defines best in class as the top 20% of all respondents. So that doesn't mean this number here in the left-hand column is the best you can achieve. This is the average of the top 20%. So for instance, the cost to process an invoice. Best in class organizations are doing it for $2.18. The remaining 80% are at $12.60. So that means, and the best in class, half are doing it for less than $2.18. So when you take a look at these numbers on the slide after the presentation, keep that in mind, just what's possible. You want to aim for best in class, but best in class means there's somebody at the top and somebody at the bottom. So there's a huge area for improvement here. So the AP's best in class clearly show the value of an AP transformation, going from manual, labor intensive to an automated, straight through processing type environment. You can see here when we're talking about the cost to process an invoice, best in class organizations do it for 6 times cheaper than the rest. In order to processing an invoice, best in class organizations can do it over 3 times faster. Invoice exception rate, 2.5 times lower with best in class organizations. Percentage of invoices processed straight through, something that we've harped on here, 65%, almost 2/3 of the invoices can be processed straight through by best in class organizations. Why is that? For many of the reasons that Dan and I have been talking about here today. Best-in-class organizations are leveraging technology. They're doing automated to and through matching. They're leveraging business rules. They're ferreting it out, the mistakes that occur, the exceptions, the bane of our existence in AP. They're taking a look. They're becoming a learning organization. So, here on this slide, if we did one slide for the entire presentation, this would be it. You can see what's possible with automation. So, Dan, these are numbers that we've recorded and reported. Do you see these economics? And how does this affect the AP departments after they've automated?
It's interesting, and those are, Bob, those are such wide gaps in terms of the way you've analyzed them here, and it's even more as you describe it. So best in class compared to all others. It's a major difference, and I've absolutely seen it. And here's something that's very interesting. I can walk into an AP department, and I can probably tell you by the look on their face if they're best in class or all others. I can walk in and see that those companies that are achieving the best in class, and like I mentioned earlier, we have clients that process for less than $2, so they're on the better edge of the best in class. And you can see it when you walk through the departments because they're happier, they're more productive, they're more satisfied. I mean, you can see it on their face. They're adding more value to the organization. You just walk in the AP department and you can say, you know what, this is a best in class AP department, because what they're doing is they're spending their time contributing at a higher level. And they're doing things where they're spending time looking at their suppliers and hey, you know what? We've got a whole group of suppliers that if we can process and improve the timing of the number of days for an invoice, we can take advantage of this amount of cash discount, and guess how much money that adds to the company. So they're spending time doing that. I've seen best-in-class companies go in and they say, hey, guess what? We want to look at our working capital. And today we're paying in, for non-discounted suppliers, we're paying in maybe 30 days. How about if we extend it to 90 and improve our working capital, but then also seek some solutions in the marketplace where supply chain finance is offered to the supplier. The supplier can get paid faster. We can pay later. Look what it does to our working capital. So there's a best-in-class company that's thinking about the time to process an invoice. They're thinking about the percentages that are electronic. They know their costs, and they're making a much greater impact to the organizations. So it's a major difference between best in class and all others, not just in the numbers that you shared, which these are staggering differences, but it's also in the value and the quality of what they're providing. And finally, as you think about the suppliers, you don't want to have the disgruntled suppliers that are taking way too long to pay their invoice. That's not a good thing for them. It's not really good for you either, because you're relying on them for your services and products and capabilities, so you need to be able to take care of those suppliers. So what I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at these best-in-class numbers, if you're not in best-in-class, you're costing your organization in that right column a lot more time, money, and it's having an impact to your company, to your supplier, and also to you as a professional. You want to be best-in-class. You want to work for a company that is providing those capabilities, because if you can focus on your goals to be electronic, you can focus on straight-through processing, you can add value for data analysis, you can add more value to yourself, to your company and to the supplier. So I would just encourage you today, as you're watching on this webinar, I would look at this report. This is a great report from Ardent Partners. Like Bob said, if you take away one thing today, if only one thing you take away is this slide, and you look at those columns, you say, I really need to be in the best in class, and I really need to have an impact. It's tough just because of motivation and morale. I'm going to move things from 10 days to 2 days. No. You need tools. You need technology. You need process improvement. You need solutions. That's how you're going to get there. You're not going to have a major impact from the right column all the way to the left without taking advantage of the tools that are in the marketplace and taking advantage of companies that have done this for years. There's companies that are experts in helping you get to best in class. So instead of trying to invent it or doing it on your own, I encourage you to look and find those solutions that will really graduate you into that best in class column.
Yep. Without a doubt. And if you're looking at these numbers today and you're cost to process an invoice or time to process an invoice is in the best in class category, congratulations. You've done some great things and you're definitely a learning organization. If you're in the other column, that's okay, because you're listening in today, you're finding out what's possible, you're finding out there's tools available to help you make improvements, and you're also hopefully learning what key metrics to measure within AP, and you have to start somewhere. So wherever you are, start there and then work on improvements. So let's talk about achieving success. And it kind of comes in perfectly here, perfect segue to what we're going to discuss here. And I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, so we'll kind of get through this quickly and get to your questions. The sage philosopher and Hall of Fame baseball player Yogi Berra, he's well known for many irreverent sayings. This one I found particularly applicable when it comes to the importance of measuring, benchmarking, and KPIs, because unless you're actively measuring the KPIs that matter the most, you stand an excellent chance of not achieving your goals. So if you don't know where you're going, chances are you're going to end up someplace else. So if you don't have any goals in place, you might hit them. The likelihood is greater that you won't. So the key to success is to focus on goals, not obstacles. Who you are tomorrow begins with what you do today. So you need to set goals and objectives and measure them on a regular basis. That's what this whole presentation is about, is trying to provide you with some key metrics if you're in accounts payable that you should be measuring. And if you're not, you should look at starting, and then also figure out where you stand today and what's possible going forward there. So figure out, when you come to an obstacle, and we're all going to come to obstacles. You're going to have a difficult person within your department or within another department or with a supplier. Don't let them frustrate you. Figure out how to overcome them, and always keep your eye on the goal that you set and figure out ways to achieve them. And if you do that, you're going to achieve success in AP. And that's really what we want you to do here, is learn what's possible, learn what to measure so you can manage things better, and ultimately achieve success, so that when, going back to the beginning of this presentation, when your CFO is at that conference or cocktail party, he's the one saying, my AP department can process an invoice for $2 and we've achieved all these other great benefits. And the other CFO goes, I think I'll go back to the punchline. That's where you want to be. So with that, I want to bring Doug back on. I think Doug was going to ask Dan and I some questions that we've received. So Dan and Doug, over to you.
Great, thanks. So we do have a couple of questions, and like Bob said, we are coming up on the top of the hour. So if we don't get to your question, we will personally send you an email and answer your question after the webinar concludes. So the first question we have are, what are the most important metrics we should start with?
I think, I think that is somewhat obvious from the presentation here. Some of those, the best in class versus all others, the metrics that we showed during this presentation. We didn't show 20 metrics. We've showed 10 or 12 different metrics, and those are the key ones. And if that's too many for you, then look at that chart that we showed a second ago with best in class versus all others, which is how much is the cost to process an invoice, what's the time to process the invoice, how many invoices are associated with a PO, how many invoices are processed straight through. those are some of the key metrics that you should be looking at. And if you're focusing on those are a good starting place to begin with. And then once you get some proficiency at those, then you can start looking at other metrics, which might be important to you as well. And, I did a presentation once and, I made a statement, there's 120 key metrics that you can measure in accounts payable. And somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, are there really 120 metrics we need to be measuring? The answer is no. But there's a lot of different ways to look at AP, to slice and dice it, to measure how well it's performing and how well it can perform. So, I'm not advocating by any means having 120 metrics that you measure, but 10 or 15 metrics is a reasonable number with which you should probably start with and probably form the core basis of the most important ones.
Great, thank you. All right, so the next one
I think just a comment on that, Doug.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hey, Doug, I was just going to add a comment. I think a lot of times sometimes they get a little bit overwhelmed with trying to calculate, let's just say, the cost, for that one metric that Bob was talking about, because then they think about, okay, is it the direct cost? Is a portion of overhead? And it gets to be complicated. A really basic one that Bob shared with is time. You can very easily figure out time you get an invoice to the time you process it, because it's date driven. You have those metrics. It's a simple way to very quickly say, how quick are we turning things around? It's not overwhelming. It doesn't really involve a ton of other areas. And as an AP professional, you can pretty quickly figure that one out as a starting point.
Great. So the next one.
That's a good bellwether.
In your experience, what habits make some AP departments better than others?
Dan, why don't you take that first?
Sure. I think those departments that really are looking at the overall impact to their company, those that are focusing on the opportunities with technology, if they know their metrics, that's a great place to start. If you know your KPIs, and if you can figure out a way to say, okay, here's what my KPIs are, here's how I compare to the industry. That's the first thing. Benchmark what you're doing to the industry. If you know that, then you know what shape you're in. And you also are going to identify those areas where you can quickly improve. So the thing that I think I see the most are those AP departments that know where they're at industry-wide. They've measured those KPIs. They've looked at some of the tools that are available, and they recognize that through education tools and technology, there is a way to achieve an extraordinarily high STP in a touchless environment. Those are the departments that are really embracing and making the change to their organization. And again, if you're not in that camp, but you now know that information, it's a great place to start because anyone can get to those levels and can achieve the best-in-class environment. It's available to everybody.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I would just add that those organizations that want to be better are the ones that are going to be more successful. Those that realize there's a better way to do things, and those are looking for continuous and constant improvement. Those are the organizations that are achieving better success because they realize, if you're dealing, and Dan and I have dealt with many companies that have 100 invoices a month to 200,000 invoices a month or more. And if you're dealing with that in a paper format, pushing things around, it quickly becomes untenable. And they realize, those organizations that want to automate realize there's a better way to do things, and they look for ways for constant improvement. And it's not, it's not like trying to boil the ocean all at once. It's one step at a time, and you'll get there eventually. And the path to success is a journey. It's not a destination. It's constant improvement. So, hey, let's take a look, as Dan said, why don't we start with the time to process an invoice, relatively easy to track from the time it's received to the time it's paid or the time it's ready for payment. We can easily track that. We don't need too much, and start with that. And then, okay, we're going to work on that. Then we're going to work on the next metric that's there and slowly add and build to those. And, a funny thing will happen. You realize how much more productive you are and successful you are as you take these steps.
Great. I actually think that's a perfect segue into our next and final question, which is, how do you recommend we get the attention of management to convince them to invest in AP?
Sure.
I think what I would
first. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead, Bob. Well, we're probably going to say the same thing because.
Yeah, I think we're of like minds here. So Dan, why don't you go first, and then I'll close it out.
I think when Bob shared those metrics of best in class and all the rest, I think you can very quickly enumerate that for an executive level to say, look what this does, look where best in class is, look where we're at, look at the benefits, look at the dollars, look at the ROI. It'll very quickly get on their radar, and they recognize the value that it brings to the organization and beyond AP. It's not just AP. You're affecting your procurement counterparts. You're affecting your suppliers. It's a broad impact. So if you can share some of those statistics at a high level, I think you're going to gain their attention.
Yeah, and just adding to what Dan said there about talking about the benefits to other parts of the business, just one piece of advice that I've seen work tremendously well is when you're trying to get this project approved and talking about the benefits to the other parts of the organization, talk in their language, not in your language. You know, the time to process an invoice, the cost to process an invoice, the number of invoices processed straight through. Those are important metrics that AP needs to manage itself by. However, procurement, treasury, line of business think differently. So when you're talking about the benefits to the lines of business, to the other departments, to your suppliers, just talk about how it helps them. You know, if it's a CFO you're talking to, talk about in his language, what's on his scorecard, how he's reviewed every year, or she's reviewed every year, which is, you know, how we can improve profitability, lower risk, improve compliance. Everything that automating AP will help you do, just make sure you're presenting it in their language so they understand it. Once you get their heads nodding going, you know, Mr. CFO, Mrs. CFO, Mrs. Treasurer, whatever it may be, you know, here's how we can improve compliance, lower the potential for risk, improve profitability, increase supplier satisfaction, all of these things. When you talk about the project in those terms, that's going to help tremendously in getting your project and AP approved over another department's project that may have similar ROIs from a savings perspective. You're going to help because the people that are approving this project can feel it with their own goals and objectives. You talk their language. So that would be my one addition to what Dan said. Talk about the savings, your ROI, but put it in the language of the person you're talking to.
Great. Thank you both. So while that is all we have time for today, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, as well as Bob Cohen and Dan Andrew for taking the time to share their insight on achieving AP success. For those of you who joined the presentation a little late, as always, a copy of today's webinar will be sent to each of you via email. If you enjoyed our webinar today and would like to check out some other additional informational webinars that we've hosted in the past, we encourage you to check out our website at corecentric.com to view our entire library of available content. And then thanks again, once again, for joining us today, and have a great evening, everyone.